What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 153 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 2. This is issues 7 through 12 of the ongoing series of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen from America's Best Comics. This is once again by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill, and the plot of this book picks up immediately after the end of Volume 1, and this is the War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, but from the point of view of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And we get to see that these guys were actually a little bit more instrumental in the defeat of the invaders in the War of the Worlds than what you would have thought if you've just seen the War of the Worlds novel. And this actually says that the invaders from Mars, or who we thought were from Mars in the War of the Worlds, they were actually not from Mars, and that they're from some other planet, and that they had actually invaded Mars before they came to Earth. And the first issue here is one of my favorite issues in all the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Almost the entire issue takes place on Mars, and we get to see characters like John Carter from Edgar Rice Burroughs, and you get to see Lieutenant Gulliver from it's a French story. I've never read it before. You can see mentions of the Sorns from C.S. Lewis's Out of the Silent Planet. You get a brief little mention of a character, Michael Caine, I believe, from Michael Moorcock's City of the Beast. You get all of these different things from different stories set on Mars, and of course, since this is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, all of these characters coexist on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen version of Mars. And that's really cool, and the idea that the mollusks, as they're called here from the War of the Worlds, that they are not actually from Mars, I think that's kind of a cool idea also. I don't think that that conflicts with what happened in the War of the Worlds that much, but I really like this book a whole lot more than Volume 1. And if you saw my video yesterday, you know that I liked Volume 1 quite a bit. What I like about this is that the team is already together. We don't have to waste 3 issues getting these guys together, and then we get to have the plot happen. We can just jump right into the plot, and in my opinion, this book is much stronger because of that. Now, we do get to see the team kind of scatter a little bit. We get to see a couple of characters go off in this one mission, and then some of these other characters, they're kind of just hanging out. They're not really doing anything important in this book, while Mina and Alan are off trying to find this secret weapon that is going to defeat the invaders. But I don't mind that because we get some good character building moments for some of these characters. We get to see Mr. Hyde developed quite a bit here. He is simultaneously much more terrifying here than he was in Volume 1, but at the same time, he becomes much more sympathetic also. It's really interesting getting to see the characters here who, at first, you think that you know them in Volume 1, and then it's like, oh, okay, they're actually very different from how I thought that they were in the previous volume. Now, Captain Nemo, he is the one character in this series that I don't think is quite as developed as what he should have been. You look at everything that he does in the first 2 volumes, and it's almost like he's just kind of there. He does do things. He helps fight the bad guys at the end of Volume 1. He helps rescue Mina and Alan at the very beginning of Volume 1. It's his idea to send the Invisible Man to spy on their bosses in Volume 1. So he does do things, but at the same time, I don't think that he gets quite the amount of development that all of these other characters get. When you read the first 2 volumes, you get a sense of, oh, okay, that's something I didn't know about this character, with every character in this series except for Captain Nemo. He is the one who is kind of the same at the beginning as he is at the end. And that's a little bit disappointing because I really like Captain Nemo. I like him here, and I like him in other places too. And so it's disappointing that Moore and O'Neill weren't able to find something to do with him, kind of like they did with Mina and Alan and Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde. Speaking of Volume 1, I mentioned in Volume 1 that we get a prose story at the end that shows Alan Quatermain teaming up with, I believe, John Carter of Mars and the Time Traveler from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. This also has some prose stuff, except that it is not a story per se. It's actually an atlas, if you will, that has all of these different notes on the history of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and their world. And it is virtually unreadable. I still have not finished reading the prose stuff for this novel, and it takes up a huge chunk of this book. This right here is how much of it is not comic book stuff. And it's just a whole lot of like, okay, at this point the League went and did this, and at this point the League went and did that. Here's basically what it looks like here. It's just a whole lot of words, and you'll occasionally get a picture there, and you may be saying, oh, the Comics Kid 2099 doesn't like to read. I like reading just fine, but whenever you buy a comic book and you kind of expect it to be a comic book, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a chore to read this chunk at the end. Even if you know that there's going to be a huge prose chunk at the end and you don't mind that at all, this is still a chore to get through. I still have not finished reading it. I've kind of just jumped around a little bit on the back chunk of this book. Some of it is interesting. Some of it leads into some of the later League of Extraordinary Gentlemen stories, but a lot of it is just there to say, okay, the creature from the Black Lagoon from that movie in the 30s, it exists in the world of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Or Auric Goldfinger, I believe, is briefly mentioned at one point, or a Goldfinger, rather. It may not be the one from the Ian Fleming James Bond novels, but you get different things where it's like, okay, so that one series of books or that one franchise of novels, it exists in the world of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And I feel like that is the main purpose of this chunk of prose at the end of this book. In my opinion, not nearly as entertaining as the story Alan and the Sundered Veil at the end of Volume 1, but it can be interesting if you're into that sort of thing. Now me, I wasn't very into that sort of thing, so I didn't really read all that. I didn't read most of it. But overall, I really like this volume much, much more than I liked Volume 1. And that's saying something because, like I said, I liked Volume 1 quite a bit. So I would highly recommend that you guys read this volume of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as well as Volume 1. These are some very entertaining superhero comics that take the superhero genre and do something entirely different with it. And I don't think that that's saying that the superhero genre as a whole is bad, but most superhero stories kind of seem to be in that same wheelhouse. This is very much outside of the wheelhouse, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that most of you would probably enjoy it as well. So those are my thoughts on The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Volume 2. I hope that you guys liked this book, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.